People look at you and suddenly start doing the math, don't they? They see your face, your energy, the way you carry yourself, and then they hear your age, and their little mental calculator starts malfunctioning. Wait, you're how old? Funny. They thought they had you figured out from a glance. That's the problem with people. They love judging the entire book from the cover, because reading the pages requires effort. Your age is a number, but your presence is a completely different language. Some people grow older without ever growing deeper. They collect birthdays, responsibilities, disappointments, and excuses, then wonder why they feel exactly the same inside. And then there are people who actually use every year to sharpen themselves. They learn, they recover, they become more disciplined, they stop chasing approval. They discover what deserves their energy and what deserves nothing but silence. That's when your appearance becomes almost irrelevant, because what people are really reacting to isn't just your face. It's the confidence created by experience, the calm created by surviving difficult moments, the energy created by refusing to become bitter, and the self-respect that comes from finally knowing who you are. Maybe they expected someone your age to behave a certain way. Maybe they expected you to look tired, uncertain, predictable, or ordinary. Instead, they found someone who carries themselves like they've already survived several versions of life. That's what surprises people. Not some magical number, not some secret formula. It's the fact that you refused to let time simply happen to you. You used it. You turned mistakes into lessons, setbacks into wisdom, and years into evidence that you're still capable of becoming something greater. While everyone else is busy comparing appearances and trying to guess your story from the outside, you're quietly becoming the kind of person whose real value can't be measured by a birth certificate, a mirror, or somebody else's expectations. Because the most interesting thing about you isn't how old you look, it's how much life you've managed to turn into strength without allowing it to steal the curiosity, confidence, and hunger that keep you moving forward. While the people staring at you try to solve the mystery from your face, your presence keeps telling a much deeper story through the way you think, the way you speak, the way you handle pressure, and the way you refuse to let a number decide what you're still capable of, becoming I can't reproduce the exact voice of the Joker character. But I can give you a dark, provocative, psychologically intense style with sharp observations and a slightly unsettling edge. People love numbers because numbers make them feel safe. Your age, your income, your status, your achievements, all neatly arranged so they can decide where you belong before you've even opened your mouth. Then you walk into the room with an energy that doesn't match the number on your birth certificate, and suddenly their little system starts falling apart. Funny, isn't it? They expected a number to tell them who you are. They expected your age to come with a personality package, a certain way of dressing, thinking, speaking, dreaming, and behaving. But what if you never agreed to those rules? What if you decided that getting older didn't mean becoming smaller? What if every year simply gave you another reason to become more aware, more confident, more selective, and more alive? That's where people get confused. They see someone who has lived through disappointment but still carries curiosity, someone who has experienced failure but still takes risks, someone who has been betrayed but hasn't completely lost the ability to trust, someone who has learned how ugly life can become without allowing that knowledge to destroy their ability to enjoy it. That's a different kind of energy. It doesn't come from pretending you're young. It comes from refusing to become mentally old before your time. There are people with young faces who already think like they've given up. They have stopped learning, stopped exploring, stopped questioning themselves. They wake up, repeat yesterday, complain about tomorrow, and call that life. Then there are people who may have more years behind them, but somehow seem more awake than everyone else in the room. They ask questions. They learn new things. They change their minds when the evidence changes. They take care of themselves. They build new goals instead of worshiping old achievements. They understand that experience should make you wiser, not permanently cynical. And that's why your energy matters more than the number. Energy is created through choices, the way you speak to yourself, the people you allow close to you, the habits you repeat when nobody is watching, the risks you're willing to take, the things you refuse to tolerate, the dreams you continue pursuing even after life has given you enough reasons to quit. You don't need to convince everyone that you're different. You don't need to announce that you're aging differently. Let them notice. Let them wonder why you still have that hunger. Let them ask why you seem calmer than people younger than you and more ambitious than people who have already achieved everything they once wanted. Maybe the answer is simple. You stopped treating age like a prison sentence. You started treating it like experience. Every year gave you information. Every mistake gave you another piece of the map. Every heartbreak taught you something about yourself. Every failure showed you what needed to change. Every difficult season forced you to discover strength you didn't know you possessed. And instead of looking at those years as evidence that your best days are behind you, you started seeing them as evidence that you've survived enough to know yourself better. While other people remain obsessed with appearances, trying to calculate how old you look and what someone your age is supposed to be doing, you become more interested in what you're capable of doing now, because your future doesn't ask for your birth year before giving you an opportunity, and your potential doesn't check your identity card before showing up, and your ambition doesn't suddenly expire because another birthday passed, while you continue learning, improving, adapting, laughing, building, failing, recovering, and starting again. Refusing to let society convince you that maturity means surrendering your curiosity, or that growing older means becoming predictable. Because there is nothing impressive about reaching another year if you spend it becoming less alive, and there is nothing tragic about getting older when every year is making you more conscious, more capable, and more honest about the person you want to become, leaving the people around you confused because they keep looking at the number while you're living from the mindset, the experience, the discipline, and the energy that number could never explain. And when they finally realize that your age doesn't determine your presence, they may understand that what they were actually noticing wasn't some mysterious trick in your appearance. It was the evidence of someone who refused to let time take away the part of them that still wants to grow, explore, create, improve, and become something they haven't been before, while the calendar keeps moving exactly as it always has, and you keep moving with it, not desperately trying to look younger, but deliberately trying to remain mentally alive, emotionally intelligent, physically capable, and hungry enough to keep becoming, because the goal was never to defeat age. The goal was to refuse to let a number become an excuse for stopping, shrinking, surrendering, or believing that your most interesting chapter has already been written, while every new year gives you another opportunity to prove that time can change your appearance without having the authority to determine your spirit, your ambition, your confidence, or the size of the life you are still willing to build. Experience doesn't automatically make you wise, which is probably the funniest thing about getting older. People collect years like trophies and assume the number itself must have upgraded their minds. But time doesn't teach you anything unless you actually pay attention. You can repeat the same mistake for 20 years and still call yourself experienced, or you can make one mistake, study it honestly, and never make the same one again. That's the difference. Your years are only valuable when you turn them into understanding. Every disappointment can become information, Every failure can reveal a weakness. Every difficult relationship can teach you something about boundaries, communication, trust, or the kind of person you should never become. But you have to be willing to look at yourself without the comfortable excuses. It's easy to blame the world. It's easy to say, everyone else was wrong. Everyone else betrayed you. Everyone else held you back. Maybe sometimes they did. But if the same pattern keeps appearing in different places with different people, eventually you have to ask the uncomfortable question, what part of this pattern belongs to me? That's where experience becomes wisdom. Not when you have more stories to tell, but when those stories change the way you behave. You stop touching the same fire just to confirm that it burns. You stop chasing people who repeatedly show you they don't value you. You stop spending money simply because you want something in the moment. You stop reacting to every insult because you've finally realized that not every provocation deserves your attention. You begin understanding that peace is often more valuable than proving a point. That's what experience can give you if you're willing to use it. It can make you slower to judge and faster to recognize patterns. It can make you less impressed by appearances and more interested in consistency. It can teach you that confidence isn't talking louder than everyone else. Sometimes it's being comfortable enough to listen. It can teach you that success isn't just getting what you want. It's becoming someone capable of handling what you get. And perhaps most importantly, experience can teach you how little you actually know. The more you learn, the more you realize how many assumptions you once treated as facts. That's not weakness. That's intellectual maturity. You don't need to pretend you have every answer. You need to become better at asking better questions. What did this situation teach me? What should I repeat? What should I never repeat? What did I ignore? What did I misunderstand? What could I have handled differently? Those questions turn life into a classroom, where every difficult experience has the potential to become useful, while other people are busy counting how many years you've been alive. You can focus on how much understanding you've gained from those years, because there is a huge difference between getting older and becoming wiser, and wisdom comes from reflection, not birthdays, from noticing patterns instead of merely experiencing them, from changing behavior instead of collecting excuses, from accepting uncomfortable truths instead of protecting your ego, and from using your past as a map rather than a prison. So when someone looks at you and wonders why you carry yourself differently, maybe they aren't seeing age at all. They're seeing lessons that finally became part of your character, the calm that comes from surviving things you once thought would destroy you, the confidence that comes from knowing you've rebuilt yourself before, and the patience that comes from realizing that not every problem needs an immediate reaction, while every year behind you becomes less important than what you extracted from it, because your past only becomes an advantage when you allow it to improve your present decisions, turning mistakes into better judgment, rejection into stronger standards, disappointment into clearer boundaries, failure into smarter preparation, and difficult seasons into evidence that you can adapt when life refuses to follow your plan, without romanticizing the pain or pretending every bad experience was necessary. Simply recognizing that you have the ability to take something useful from what happened and carry that knowledge forward, becoming more difficult to fool because you've learned to watch actions instead of promises, more difficult to pressure because you've learned what your priorities actually are, and more difficult to discourage because you've already experienced moments when you thought you couldn't continue and discovered that you could, while the calendar keeps adding numbers and you keep adding understanding, choosing to become deeper instead of merely older, sharper instead of merely more experienced, and more intentional instead of simply more familiar with the world. Because the real value of time isn't the number of years you've collected. It's the wisdom you've managed to build from everything those years tried to teach you. Every mistake, every victory, every loss, every unexpected turn, every moment that forced you to look at yourself honestly, and every lesson you refused to waste, allowing your experience to become a quiet advantage that doesn't need to announce itself, because it appears naturally in the way you think, choose, speak, respond, recover, and continue moving when other people are still making the same mistakes they made years ago, while you carry the past not as proof of everything you've suffered, but as evidence of everything you've learned, using yesterday to make today smarter without allowing yesterday to decide what tomorrow is allowed to become. Society has a funny little habit of handing people invisible instructions and then acting surprised when someone refuses to follow them, as if there is a secret handbook explaining exactly how you're supposed to dress, think, behave, dream, succeed, and even age. And the moment you step outside those lines, people start looking at you like you've broken some ancient law nobody remembers agreeing to. You're supposed to achieve certain things by a certain age. You're supposed to settle down at a certain time. You're supposed to stop experimenting, stop taking risks, stop changing direction, stop chasing strange ambitions, and eventually become predictable enough that everyone feels comfortable around you. But what if predictable isn't your goal? What if the life that makes sense to everyone else feels completely wrong to you? That's where courage becomes necessary. Not the dramatic kind where you stand on a stage and announce that you don't care what anyone thinks, but the quiet kind where you make a decision that disappoints people and still have enough confidence to live with it. Because here's the truth. Other people's expectations are often based on their own fears, experiences, and limitations. Someone tells you that you're too old to start something new because they can't imagine themselves starting over. Someone tells you to be realistic because their definition of realistic was built from what they believed was possible for them. Someone tells you to stop dreaming because they've already stopped dreaming themselves. And suddenly their limitations are being presented to you as advice. Convenient, isn't it? You don't have to accept that bargain. You can listen without obeying. You can respect someone's opinion without allowing it to become your life plan. You can consider advice, examine the risks, and still decide that your path needs to look different. That's maturity. Rebellion for the sake of rebellion is easy. Independent thinking is harder. It requires you to take responsibility for your choices instead of blaming society when things don't work out. If you choose a different path, understand the consequences. Plan, prepare, learn, adjust. Don't simply reject expectations because you want to feel rebellious. Reject the ones that don't align with your values after you've thought carefully about what you actually want. Maybe you want to change careers when everyone expects you to stay where you are. Maybe you want to start a business after years of working for someone else. Maybe you want to learn something completely new. Maybe you want to travel, create, study, rebuild your health, strengthen your relationships, or simply become a different version of yourself. You don't need a committee to approve the decision, but you do need to be honest about the work it requires. Freedom without responsibility is just another form of chaos. Real freedom means choosing your direction and accepting ownership of where it leads. While other people keep asking whether your choices make sense according to the timeline they created for you, you can ask a much more important question: whether those choices make sense according to the life you actually want to live, because your birthday doesn't know your dreams, your neighbors don't know your private struggles, your relatives don't know every possibility inside your mind, and strangers certainly don't get to decide when your ambition should expire. While the world keeps trying to place you inside categories that make you easier to understand, you become more interested in becoming someone who doesn't fit neatly into the expectations they prepared for you. Not because you're trying to shock anyone, but because you're finally taking responsibility for writing your own definition, choosing growth when they expect comfort, learning when they expect certainty, starting again when they expect you to stay stuck, and continuing to dream when they think your best opportunities have already passed. Because sometimes the most important rebellion is simply refusing to become smaller so other people can feel more comfortable around you, while still remaining grounded enough to recognize that independence doesn't mean ignoring every piece of advice. It means thinking carefully, separating useful wisdom from inherited fear, and making decisions based on your values, rather than the pressure of a crowd that may never have understood what you were trying to build. Allowing yourself to evolve without constantly asking whether everyone else approves of the latest version of you, because you are not required to remain the person people became comfortable with simply because they like that version better. And you are not obligated to stop growing just because someone else has already decided what your age, background, or circumstances supposedly allow, while you continue learning, experimenting, adapting, and choosing your direction with enough humility to correct yourself, and enough courage to keep going when the path looks unfamiliar, refusing to confuse other people's expectations with your destiny. Because the moment you realize that their rules were never written specifically for your life, you gain permission to question them, rewrite the unnecessary ones, and build a future that actually belongs to you. While the people who once wondered why you weren't following the expected timeline slowly realize that maybe you were never late at all. Maybe you were simply building something that required a different schedule, a different mindset, and the courage to stop measuring your progress against people who were never walking toward the same destination, leaving you free to become who you actually want to be, rather than who everyone else assumed you should become. A strong mind doesn't expire because a birthday arrives, and that's something people conveniently forget when they start treating age like a deadline. They act as if curiosity belongs to the young, ambition belongs to the middle-aged, and wisdom belongs to some imaginary final chapter where you're finally allowed to sit down and stop wanting things. But why? Who decided your desire to learn had an expiration date? Who decided you couldn't start over, change direction, learn a new skill, build something meaningful, or become fascinated by something completely unfamiliar? A number can describe how long you've been alive, but it can't measure how awake your mind is. An ageless mindset isn't about pretending you're younger than you are. It's about refusing to become mentally rigid. It's the willingness to stay curious when you've already convinced yourself that you know enough. It's the courage to learn from someone younger than you without feeling threatened. It's the humility to admit that technology changed, society changed, your circumstances changed, and maybe some of your old beliefs need updating too. That's not weakness, that's adaptability. The world doesn't care how comfortable your old opinions were. Reality keeps changing whether you approve of it or not. If you refuse to adapt, eventually your certainty becomes a cage. Look at the difference between someone who says, "I've always done it this way," and someone who asks, "Is there a better way now?" One is protecting history. The other is creating possibility. And yes, experience matters. Your past can give you valuable judgment, but experience becomes dangerous when you use it as an excuse to stop learning. You don't want to become the person who knows everything because they've stopped asking questions. You want to remain curious enough to discover that there's always another perspective, another skill, another opportunity, another version of yourself waiting to be developed. That's how you keep your mind alive. Read something unfamiliar. Talk to people outside your usual circle. Learn a skill that makes you uncomfortable. Try something where you aren't immediately good at it. Being a beginner again can be humbling, which is exactly why it's useful. It reminds your ego that competence isn't permanent, and that growth requires discomfort. You don't need to master everything. You simply need to remain willing to learn. An ageless mindset also means refusing to let past failures become predictions about your future. You tried something once, and it didn't work. Fine. That was information, not prophecy. A relationship ended. Fine. That doesn't mean connection is over forever. A career change didn't go well. Fine. Maybe you learned what direction not to take. You lost confidence. Fine. Confidence can be rebuilt through action. The point isn't to deny what happened. It's to refuse to let yesterday become a dictator, while other people measure your possibilities according to your age, your history, or the mistakes they remember. You can measure yourself according to your willingness to keep learning, adapting, and moving, because a curious mind doesn't ask whether it's too late before exploring an opportunity. It asks whether the opportunity is meaningful, whether the work is worth doing, and whether you're willing to learn what you don't yet know. And that's a completely different way of thinking. One that doesn't require you to chase youth but instead encourages you to protect the qualities that make life feel alive: curiosity, creativity, ambition, humor, courage, wonder, and the willingness to begin again. While your appearance changes and your circumstances change, your ability to remain mentally flexible becomes one of the most valuable forms of strength you can develop. Because the person who keeps learning remains capable of surprise, and the person who remains capable of surprise is much harder to trap inside a fixed identity, allowing you to become different versions of yourself throughout your life without treating change as evidence that something is wrong. While everyone else is trying to figure out what someone your age is supposed to be doing, you can remain focused on what makes sense for your goals, your values, and your current reality, continuing to learn without embarrassment, starting again without shame, and changing your mind without treating it like defeat. Because there is nothing mature about refusing to grow, simply because growth makes you uncomfortable. And there is nothing foolish about being curious, simply because someone thinks you should already know everything, while you continue building an ageless mindset that doesn't fight time but uses it, turning every year into another opportunity to become more capable, more adaptable, and more aware, keeping the mind open enough to learn, and the confidence strong enough to experiment, because the goal isn't to stay exactly the same forever. The goal is to keep becoming, even when the person you become next would have been unrecognizable to the person you were years ago, while the calendar keeps moving forward and you keep moving with it, not desperately trying to outrun age, but refusing to let age convince you that your curiosity, ambition, or capacity for change has already reached its limit. And that's how you remain mentally alive long after other people have decided they already know who they're supposed to be, leaving enough room in your future for new ideas, new skills, new challenges, new opportunities, and new versions of yourself that haven't even had a reason to exist yet, while you keep asking the questions that keep the mind moving, instead of accepting the answers that keep it comfortably asleep. People can measure your age, count your birthdays, examine your appearance, and still completely misunderstand your value, because presence isn't something a number can explain. It's built slowly through the way you carry yourself when nobody is applauding, the way you respond when things don't go your way, the way you treat people who can't give you anything, and the way you continue moving after life has given you enough reasons to become bitter. That's why real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't walk into a room screaming, Look at me. It simply exists, and people notice. They notice when someone isn't desperate for approval. They notice when you can sit quietly without needing to prove you're important. They notice when criticism doesn't immediately destroy your mood. They notice when you can admit you don't know something without feeling humiliated. That's presence, not perfection, not arrogance, not pretending you're better than everyone else. It's the quiet evidence that you know who you are, and you're not constantly waiting for strangers to confirm it. Funny thing is, people often chase confidence by copying the outside appearance of confident people. They change clothes, imitate voices, force expressions, and try to look mysterious, thinking confidence is some costume they can purchase. But eventually the costume gets tired. Real confidence comes from keeping promises to yourself. When you say you'll do something and actually do it, your mind notices. When you set a boundary and maintain it, your mind notices. When you survive a difficult period and refuse to abandon yourself, your mind notices. Slowly, you begin trusting yourself, and self-trust changes the way you move through the world. You don't need to convince everyone you're capable, because you have evidence from your own life. You don't need to pretend you're fearless, because you've already learned that courage doesn't require the absence of fear. You can be nervous and still act. You can be uncertain and still make a decision. You can fail and still continue. That's what people actually feel when they say someone has a powerful presence. They're responding to internal stability becoming visible on the outside. And that stability doesn't mean you never have bad days. You will. You can look tired, feel confused, lose motivation, or question yourself. The difference is that your identity isn't destroyed every time life becomes uncomfortable. You know that a difficult day is a moment, not a definition. You know that one person's opinion is an opinion, not a verdict. You know that getting older doesn't mean becoming less valuable, and looking different doesn't mean becoming less worthy. Your presence becomes stronger when you stop treating every change as a threat to your identity. While people around you remain fascinated by how you carry yourself, because they can sense that your confidence isn't coming from trying to look young, powerful, or impressive. It's coming from experience, self-respect, discipline, and the knowledge that you've already survived versions of yourself you once thought you couldn't survive. And that creates a calm that can't be easily manufactured. Because you're no longer performing for the room, you're simply existing comfortably inside your own skin, knowing that some people will like you, some won't, some will misunderstand you, and some will try to reduce you to a number, an appearance, a mistake, or a stereotype. But none of those opinions have the authority to determine your value. While your actions continue telling the story more clearly than any introduction ever could, showing people that confidence isn't about being the most attractive, the youngest, the loudest, or the most successful person in the room. It's about being grounded enough that you don't need to become someone else just because somebody else walked in. And when you reach that point, your presence starts speaking before you do. Because people can feel when someone is comfortable with themselves, when someone has standards, when someone knows their direction, and when someone isn't desperately searching the room for permission to exist, allowing your character to become louder than your appearance and your consistency to become stronger than other people's assumptions. While you continue improving without hating who you are today, pursuing goals without believing your worth depends on achieving them, and aging without treating every birthday like evidence that time is stealing something from you, because time can change your face, but it doesn't have to diminish your presence, and experience can change your priorities without destroying your ambition, and maturity can make you calmer without making you less alive, leaving you with a kind of confidence that doesn't need to be performed, because it has been built through years of choices, mistakes, recoveries, lessons, boundaries, and moments when you decided to keep going, even when nobody was watching, while people continue trying to figure out why you seem different from what they expected. You don't need to explain the mystery. You simply keep living in a way that makes the explanation obvious, letting your presence speak through your actions, your discipline, your self-respect, your curiosity, and your willingness to continue becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more alive than the person you were yesterday, without needing to prove that you are exceptional, because your life is already showing what you have chosen to become.